All right, so far in solving quadratics, we have talked about factoring and graphing. And today what we're going to look at is completing the square, or complete the square. Now, the process of completing the square, or the reason completing the square is good, is because we can get an exact answer, meaning it won't have decimals. And we would use this when factoring doesn't work. So a traditional factoring methods doesn't work for us, then we would complete the square. Okay, so the reason it's called completing the square is because you are actually completing a picture of a square. So if you remember algebra tiles, and probably not all of you have used algebra tiles, but in algebra tiles, there are three types of tiles, okay? We have a tile, I'm going to draw them to the side. We have a big square tile like this that's called our x squared tile. We have little skinny, long as the box tile, and these are called our x tiles. And then we have a 1 tile that is the width of the x tile. So we have x squared, x, and 1. Well, if we have an x squared term and a bx term, if I take whatever this bx is and I divide it into 2 equal parts, and I put one part on one side and one part on the other side, you will see it creates almost a square. What's missing is this chunk right here. So when we put this chunk in, we have completed the square. So that's the visual representation of what completing the square looks like. Okay, well, let's talk about what makes a perfect square. If we look at x squared minus 10x plus something, to find a perfect square, what we're going to do is we're going to take our b value, in our case our b value is negative 10, and just like they did up here, we're going to take b and divide it by 2. So I'm going to take negative 10 and divide it by 2 to get negative 5. But then notice what was next is they squared the negative 5, or they squared the b divided by 2. So this squared would be 25. So what makes this a perfect square is 25. Now, the reason we know it's a perfect square is because I can factor this and make it x minus 5 times x minus 5, or we may call it x minus 5 squared. Okay, so try the next one. Hit pause, try the next one, and see if you can figure out what makes it a perfect square. Okay, so while you were thinking about it, I drew an example of what this might look like. So each of these boxes, this would be x squared, and this would be 1x and 1x and 1x and 1x and 1x and 1x. So 6x is there, and then 6x is here. So this would be an example of x squared plus 12x. How many little 1 boxes do I need to fill in here to make up the entire square, to make it a perfect square? Well, hopefully you took the b divided by 2, got 6, and squared it to give us 36. Well, there would be 36 boxes in here to complete the square. Now, this is called a perfect square because if we look at the dimensions across each side, both of them are x plus 6. Okay, so x plus 6 would be the perfect square. All right, now you might be asking why we would use this complete the square idea to solve. So let's go through some steps to be able to solve, and then we'll look at some examples. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to take any equation that we are given, and we want to write it in the form of, and we're doing this when a equals 1. So x squared plus bx equals negative c. That just means instead of it equaling 0 like it's done so far, we're going to move that constant term over. Then I'm going to find half of the b value, and then I'm going to square it. So I'm going to find half of the b value and square it, or I'm going to do b divided by 2 squared. I'm going to add that number to both sides. I'm going to factor the one side. And what I'm going to do then is, because I'm using squares, I'm going to find the square root of each side, and then I'm going to solve for x. All right, let's give it a shot. Okay, so following the example above, I'm going to write the equation in the form of x squared plus bx minus c. So in our problem, it's going to be x squared plus 6x equals positive 3. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the b value, which is 6, and I'm going to do half of the b value, so b divided by 2, which is 3, and then I'm going to square it. So I'm going to take that answer and I'm going to square it, which gives me 9. Now what it tells me to do is add that number to both sides. So I'm going to take each side of my equation, x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 3 plus 9. So I'm adding that to both sides. Now I'm going to factor the one side. So to factor this, I need two numbers that multiply to 9 and add to 6. So it would be x plus 3 and x plus 3 equals 12. And x plus 3 times x plus 3 is x plus 3 squared. That'll make our life easier. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the square root of each side. Well, I know taking the square root undoes the squared. So we get x plus 3 equals the square root of 12, plus or minus the square root of 12. To finish this, I'm going to simplify and get x by itself. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides to get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 12. Now the best answer is going to actually be able to simplify this radical as well. So that's going to give me x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 4 times 3. So we get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 2 root 3. These are my exact answers. They could give me a decimal approximation, but I don't want that. I want to know my exact answers. So hit pause and try the next one. All right, let's try this one. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move it so I have x squared plus 4x equals negative 2. And then I'm going to take my b value and I'm going to divide it by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. And I'm going to square that, which is 4. And I'm going to add that to both sides. So we get x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals negative 2 plus 4. So those are the two 4s I added. Maybe I'll put them in green. And then I'm going to factor one side, just the one side. And if I factor x squared plus 4x plus 4, I'm going to get x plus 2 times x plus 2, which is x plus 2 squared. And that equals 2. And then when I take the square root of both sides, remember when you take the square root, your answer is plus or minus. So we get plus or minus square root of 2. And then I subtract 2 from both sides. And we get x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. Okay, so the process is going to be a little bit different when we solve by completing the square when a is greater than 1. In that, the equation is still going to be in the form of ax squared plus bx equals negative c. The difference is we have an a value now. So what we're going to do is we are going to factor the a out of the two terms. So we're going to take this a and factor it out of these first two terms here, ax squared and the bx. Then we're going to go through and we're going to find half of the b value, the new b value, and square it. Add that number multiplied by, this is the important part, multiplied by the a we factored out to both sides, and then finish the problems like we did before. Okay, so let's walk through this. First, I'm going to set this equals so that -7 is on the other side. Now I'm going to factor a out of the two terms. So I see that the a that I can factor out is a 2, which leaves me with x squared minus 6x. Now I'm going to take half of the b, but half of the b is a different b. So I'm going to take half of the b I get when I factor it out. So I'm going to take half of -6 divided by 2 to get -3, and I'm going to square that to get 9. And I'm going to add that number multiplied by a to both sides. So let me show you what that looks like. On the left-hand side, we would have 2 parentheses x squared minus 6x plus 9. So really what I'm doing is I'm multiplying a, this 2, by this 9. I just didn't write it. And that's going to equal -7 plus, remember I need to add the b to both sides. But this time I'm going to do it the a times the b, so I'm going to be adding 2 times 9. So really what I'm adding is 18 to this side. We get this from doing 2 times 9. And then I'm going to continue the process. So I'm going to factor x squared minus 6x plus 9 to get x minus 3 times x minus 3 equals 11. So then we get 2x minus 3 squared equals 11. Now to finish solving this, I know I need to get my variable by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2 first. So I get x minus 3 squared divided by, divided by, equals 11, which is 5.5. Then I'm going to square root both sides. And remember, when I square root both sides, we get plus or minus the square root of 5.5. And then I'm going to add 3 to both sides, so we get x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 5.5. Okay, there's a quick tutorial on solving quadratics by completing the square.